order to confidently progress on the drums, you need to know that you're doing things right. And this is especially crucial with grip. Unfortunately though, because many drummers are learning online, they don't have direct feedback on their playing. This leads to a lot of uncertainty and just fear of building bad habits and not doing things right. But not to worry, because today I'm teaching you 3 ways to test your grip. If your grip passes these 3 tests, or this 3-step test, then you are good to go and you can proceed with confidence. You can do this. Hey, welcome to the Non-Glamorous Drummer. I'm so glad you're hanging out with me today. I help hobby drummers and semi-pro drummers become the players that everybody wants to listen to. And we do this by teaching you the core drumming skills that ultimately save you a lot of time in the practice room and get you results faster. And hey, speaking of quick results, how would you like to be able to play anything you want to play on the drums without a weak hand getting in the way? You've probably noticed that both of your hands are not even, and that no matter how much you practice, that weak hand doesn't just solve itself. Really what you need is a step-by-step solution that you know is going to deliver some results. And I believe you're fully capable of this. Probably the only reason you have a weak hand is because you just haven't known exactly what you need to practice. But once you know the core steps to eliminating it, you can 100% do it. I believe in you. So I want you to enroll in my totally free mini course. It's called Eliminate Your Weak Hand in 3 Steps. We dig into the 3 critical steps to mastering that left hand. Whether your weak hand is your left hand or your right hand, doesn't matter. We talk about the mechanics, the exact grip you need to be doing to make sure both hands are doing the same thing. We get into hand-to-hand coordination so that you can move fluidly around the drums and nail your favorite fills, and even play open-handed and play things backwards and have that total coordination freedom between your hands. And that's what we want. Freedom is the word here. That's what I want for you. You're fully capable of solving this when you've got the right resources, the right tools. So let me be your guide, your coach. Dive into the free course. My gift to you, it's in the description. Let's dive into today's lesson. You can be confident that you're growing and doing things right. Just because you're learning online and it's just you in your garage or spare bedroom doesn't mean you have to feel alone. You can have confidence that you're doing things right, that you're growing, you're doing what you're supposed to, and that you're not building bad habits. So I want you to be confident in that. That's why we're going through these 3 tests today. You can do this. This is going to be really cool. We're going to talk about the stick toss. That's the first one. Then the Carmine Appice grip. You may or may not have heard of this. And then the 12 o'clock bounce. So these are really the 3 things. It's very simple. This is not complicated. It's not like you've got to check a million boxes to make sure you're doing this right. It's just a few things. If these couple of fundamental core things are in place with your grip, you don't have anything to worry about. So I hope to take some stress off of this and just let you know, hey, you're on track as long as you're doing these simple things. So let's dive into this. The stick toss. The whole idea here with the stick toss is we're just going to toss the stick back and forth in the air. That's all that it is. But in order for this to happen well, in order for this to work smoothly, you have to have a fulcrum in your grip. That's what's so crucial. If you don't have a distinct fulcrum point in your grip, you're going to run into trouble. I've had students where maybe their fulcrum hasn't really been totally stable, or it's a little bit wishy-washy, and they're always running into trouble. But if you can nail down, all right, this is where I'm going to grip my stick, then you're going to be good. Here's what we're talking about. I like to grip with a fulcrum about right here. That's my personal preference. So the stick is hinging right here. Think of it as an axle that's going through your thumb, through the stick, out the other side of your finger. It's literally like an axle. I think of like a little Hot Wheels car or something. And the stick is hinging on that axle. It's never moving out of that. That axle, your fulcrum, is going to stay in place. It's going to be very consistent. We'll talk about how we might move it around a little bit. But for the most part, it's going to stay right here, but it's going to allow the stick to have this free range of motion without you putting a whole lot of pressure here. What's cool is if you form your fulcrum kind of with the edge of your thumb, not with the pad of your thumb, but sort of with the edge here, you've got it, halfway up a finger, whether it's middle finger, you could also do this with index finger. The idea is that you want to find the place where you can put just a little bit of pressure on here, not squeezing tight, just enough that you can then with your other hand sit here and go like this and swing the stick back and forth. This is really the fundamental step 1 of the stick toss. Be able to do this and then start doing this. So we're basically just flicking it up. We're using our wrist to kind of toss the stick up and then giving it a little nudge to go down, back up. So flick it up, toss it down. And while you're doing this, make sure it is staying within this point. Now you can experiment. You can say, all right, I want to see if I can do a fulcrum right here, like way up the middle finger. You could try that. or you could try a little closer to the end, or you could try it with index finger. You could go here, you could go here. There's not one rule that says this is where your fulcrum has to be. And actually, as you change volume and or tempo, you might want to change it a little bit. When you're playing very slow and relaxed, it's great to have a fulcrum like right here, I think. If I'm playing like this, my fulcrum's here. But as I go faster, I allow that fulcrum to gradually slide up my middle finger. That way my grip can become actually a little bit firmer, because long story short, I'll link another video in the description that goes more in depth about this transition, but long story short, what we want to do as we go faster, if we're trying to stay loud, like this, what we want to do is gradually increase the pressure on the fulcrum, otherwise the stick flies out, right? If we stay super loose and relaxed, the stick is going to fly out, we're going to lose control. So something has to change, and that something is putting a little bit more pressure on the fulcrum. Not much, but just a little bit more. And what you'll notice is that you can more easily put pressure in this direction with your thumb when the stick is further up this way. You'll find that right here, you can put a good bit of pressure on the stick with very little effort from this thumb muscle. Versus if you're way out here, you find this muscle is tenser, you're having to squeeze harder. So if you want to put more pressure on the fulcrum as you're going louder and faster, let the fulcrum slide up that finger a little bit. So maybe that means you're here on your index or you're here on your middle. We're not moving a lot. This is less than an inch range here. It might be more like half an inch, where we might be here for loose and slow, but we might be here for a little more firm as we go faster. So I know I'm throwing a lot of these little details at you, but there are other lessons here on the channel going in depth about this that I definitely strongly encourage you to check out. But know that the fundamental thing here is find your fulcrum. You need to have a fulcrum point, figure out where the stick can hinge, try to put as little pressure on it as possible, but just enough that it keeps it in place. Practice going back and forth like this with your other hand on the butt end of the stick, and practice tossing it down, flicking it up. This is the stick toss. And if you can do this, you're already well on your way ahead of so many drummers out there, because you have nailed down the fundamental grip aspect that is going to allow you to do anything you ever want to do on the drums. This is so important. So the stick toss, make sure you're able to pass the stick toss test. Up next, what I'm calling the Carmine Appice grip. This is kind of interesting. So Carmine Appice was a rock drummer back in the day. He also wrote realistic rock, if you're familiar with that method. But he had this weird grip that he would use sometimes, and I actually made a video here on the channel about this particular grip because some students of mine were asking about it. But what you do is you put the stick between your index finger and your middle finger like this, and just go like that. And what's interesting here, we're not going to get into the pros and cons of it necessarily. We talk about it a little more in this other video on the channel. But the whole idea is that it gives you this very loose kind of range of motion. And so Carmine Appice would use it sometimes, and another drummer, Gerald Hayward, has also used it from time to time, and I'm sure there are others out there, because it gives you the ability to play very loosely, lots of rebound potential, nothing in the way, and you can also use some fingers. I'm not a big fan of this as a default grip. I definitely don't recommend it as your default grip, but here's why we're talking about it today. This is one of our grip tests, because we want to do this so that we can feel what free rebound ought to feel like. Because when you do this, when you put the stick right here and you toss it down, it's going to bounce freely because there's nothing getting in the way of it. There's nothing possibly stopping the butt end. When you throw it down, the butt end swings out, and you know, unless you're just trying to clamp it like this, that's not what we're doing. We're just keeping fingers very straight and relaxed like this. And so when you throw the stick down, it's going to pop right back up. And so what I want you to do is experience the feeling of the stick popping right back up. If you're not experiencing that kind of rebound with your normal grip, then something's not right. A lot of times I'll have students playing singles and their stroke will start to look like this. Notice how there's a little pause and a wiggle when the stick's like 5 or 6 inches up. Watch. The reason why it's doing that is because I'm putting too much pressure on the fulcrum. That's the core reason here. And because I'm putting too much pressure on my fulcrum, I'm actually stopping the rebound right here. But because my hand, my wrist, my arm are in this smooth up and down motion, the stick still ends up coming up. So it almost hides the fact that the free rebound is not actually happening. We want for the natural rebound to pop all the way up, not just to here and then we lift it manually. We want it to naturally go up, and we can use a little bit of arm and of course some wrist to allow that full motion to happen. But make sure it's uninhibited. And that's why this is so important to test out that feeling of this, because if you find that, okay, this feels one way, like this is the totally loose thing, but then when I switch over to my normal grip, suddenly this is happening, well, we know, okay, something's not right. And odds are it's either that you're losing that fulcrum, that it's not stable, like maybe it's too close to the end of a finger and so you're actually getting too stiff with it, or maybe it's just slipping out and maybe your thumb's not directly across from your finger, things are out of line. You know, if you've got an axle that's all bent up, the wheels are not going to be able to spin the way they're supposed to. And that's kind of the way this is, where everything's got to be in line. So if you're finding that your rebound does not feel as smooth as our Carmine Appice grip rebound here, then evaluate that fulcrum. Double check that the stick toss is working. Make sure that you're not squeezing too tight. You want to put as little pressure on there as possible, just enough to make sure you're keeping it under control there and it's not, you know, falling out. Just enough that it's working, but not so much that we're getting that and having that pause. So that's the main thing I want you looking at as you're doing the Carmine Appice grip and you're testing this out. But for so many students of mine, this has been really helpful, just to do this and figure out, okay, this is what the grip is supposed to be like, what the rebound is supposed to be like. So then you can grab your other stick and maybe you're doing this with one hand and you're doing your normal grip with the other hand. You're going, okay, are these reacting the same way? Like, is it the same pace, the same kind of rebound? That's a great way to test it, just side by side like that. All right, our third test. Now, the cool thing here is that if you nailed down that first test, like if you passed the first test, then odds are you're going to pass the second test. And at this point, if you pass the first test and the second test, then you probably don't even have to worry about this third test. But we're just going to make sure, we're going to absolutely make sure you're good to go and that you're doing everything right. So our third test, I'm just calling it the 12 o'clock bounce. All we want to do is make sure that if we toss the stick down with any amount of decent energy, it should be popping up to the full upright 12 o'clock position. Now, I'm doing this right now on my Aquarian Super Pad practice pad. This is my all-time favorite practice pad. You see it here on my snare in so many of my videos. It's not one of the cheapest pads, but it's well worth the money. I know when I bought this one, I think it was about 60 bucks, maybe more now, I don't know for sure. But I definitely recommend it because it's not hard on your hands. By the way, this is not an official endorsement. I'm just a big fan of the Aquarian Super Pad. And if you want to get one, go for it. What I like about them is they're not really hard, so you don't feel that impact when the stick hits. They've actually got a little bit of give, a little bit of squish to them. They're more of like a foam kind of material with a coating on top versus like a hard rubber material like an Evans Real Feel. And so honestly, it feels a little more realistic. And actually, the rebound is very similar to a medium high tuned snare. The initial bounce is a little bit bouncier than an actual snare drum, but then the rest of it, like that right there, the tail of the rebound, so to speak, is very similar. And so I think it's a great practice pad. But I say that to say, you'll get a little bit of extra bounce if you're doing this on a practice pad versus if you're practicing this directly on your snare. So I just want to put that in context. If you're aiming for that 12 o'clock bounce and you're just hitting your snare, and maybe your snare is medium tuned or maybe it's a little bit lower, you might actually have a hard time getting the 12 o'clock bounce. So I want you to know that if your drums are tuned lower, you're not going to get that natural free rebound. So if you're practicing this on your snare, tune your snare up a little bit. I'd aim for a medium to high tuning, and if you're at a high tuning, you'll definitely get a nice full rebound. But otherwise, do this on your practice pad. You don't have to have a full rebound when you hit a floor tom, obviously, or when you hit the edge of your hi-hats, but you definitely should when you hit the top of your ride cymbal or you hit the bow of your crash. You should definitely get that natural rebound. So I recommend doing this on your pad just as an exercise as we're testing this. So the question is, if you're not getting that full 12 o'clock rebound, if something's stopping it from rebounding smoothly, well, what could that be? What could be wrong at this point? Because we've nailed down the fulcrum. We've made sure that we're not squeezing too tight, so that should allow us a free rebound. The only other thing that I've seen getting in the way with many students is the fingers, because there's always that tension. This was something pounded into my head as I was learning. It was the whole thing of don't let your fingers stick out. But yet, what I would always find was if I didn't let my fingers stick out, then the stick couldn't rebound because my fingers kept catching it. And so it would end up like this, where it was just too stiff, versus if I went like this and just let my fingers stick out, I would get a perfectly fine rebound, just like with our Carmine Appice grip. So the trick is that you've got to have your fingers there. You can't do this. Don't do the old middle school grip. My college percussion teacher would call this a middle school grip and make fun of it. Don't do the middle school grip here. Keep your fingers wrapped around because we're going to use those fingers. Number one, they're going to help give you stability and control. Number two, they're going to give you speed as you're trying to play faster and get into this territory.
And so you need your fingers. They're a powerful asset that you have at your disposal, and you want to train them to do what you need them to do. So we want to set ourselves up for success with that and not just leave the fingers out to dry. But what we have to do is make sure that the fingers are in operation with the stick and they're clearing out of the way as the stick goes up. So all you've got to do is, as you're playing, your fingers are just going like this. It's almost like a wave. It's almost like you're just kind of waving. Starting out, maybe your fingers are here, and as the stick is rebounding, you're letting them extend a little bit just to stay out of the way. You could think of this as your fingers are following the stick. They're not driving the stick. Don't misunderstand me here. We're not going like this and trying to use the fingers to drive the motion. That turns into a sloppy mess. I've had students go that route before, and we've always had to clear that up and go, whoa, wait. Don't try to use your fingers till you're going faster. So we're not trying to do this. All that we want to do is have a default position of about right here when we're going down. And then as the stick rebounds, our wrist comes up a little bit, but then we extend the fingers so the stick can continue rebounding. Otherwise, we got to lift our wrist really far, which puts strain on the wrist and forearm here, and we don't want that. So practice extending those fingers. If you're doing a middle finger fulcrum, then as the stick rebounds, your middle finger should actually straighten out pretty well. If you're doing an index finger fulcrum, pretty much the same case. For me, as I'm going very slow and open like this, I'd much prefer the middle finger. But play around with what's comfortable to you. Your fingers should not be curved around the stick. Pinky should not be catching it. Ring finger should not be catching the stick when you're trying to do this. But as you go faster, if you're staying loud as you get faster, you can begin curling those fingers around, because then they'll keep the stick from flying out. As you go faster, you have to constrain that energy into this space so that then you're not losing control. And like I mentioned a minute ago, ultimately that's a topic for another lesson, which I'll link below, where we go more in depth about what all do we need to change in order to play faster. Right now we're just talking about the fundamentals of your slow, relaxed, open stroke. So watch out for those fingers. Make sure that they're opening and that they're not getting in the way. So many times we get in our own way. Our fingers get in the way. Our fulcrum actually gets in the way. So many times we're not actually allowing the stick to do what the laws of physics are trying to make it do. And so a big objective here is stay out of the way. In order to gain control, you have to lose it. You've got to let go of control, let go of squeezing, let go of trying to manipulate things, and just let the stick do what it wants to do. And that's how you know you're on the path to success. So when it comes down to it, really this is all that matters, just this one thing. Hear me on this. As long as you are getting smooth rebound and you're not feeling any pain anywhere, you're good. I don't care what you're doing. Whether or not your grip looks just like mine, as long as you're able to get that free, smooth rebound and you're not feeling any pain anywhere, you're fine. And if you're following these steps and you're passing these 3 tests, then your grip is going to scale in tempo and in volume. You'll be able to play as loud as you need to. You'll be able to get faster, and you should still avoid that pain. Now, as you're working on getting faster, you do have to build some strength, build some muscles. I've always faced that, where you might feel a little bit of a burn, and so then you stretch, and so that's a good kind of pain. Just watch out for that. As long as there's no pain, you're fine, and you're doing things right. Definitely check out the additional lessons in the description where we go more in depth with some of these topics we talked about today, if that's you and if you feel like you need to go deeper with that. But hey, as we wrap up, question for you. Did you get hung up on any of these? Did you automatically pass all 3 tests? If so, awesome. That's fantastic. Congratulations. If you got hung up on anything, whether it was that 3rd one, or maybe the 2nd one, or odds are if you got hung up on any of these, it was probably that 1st one, because that's the trickiest one. And like I told you, if you get the first step, that first test under control, the other 2 are pretty much going to solve themselves. So did you get hung up on any of these? If so, go focus specifically on that step so that you get that loose grip working. If you need to focus on that stick toss, work on the stick toss, and then odds are the next 2 tests are going to solve themselves. And while you're here, don't forget to grab my free gift to you, the 3 steps to eliminating your weak hand. Totally free mini course. I want you to dive in and check it out. It's been helping so many drummers because it'll teach you the detailed mechanics of what your grip needs to be doing, getting to the core of the issue. If you've had a left hand that's not behaving, this is going to solve it once and for all. And then we talk about a lot of hand-to-hand coordination, all of this working together to give you the ability to play fluidly around the kit, to nail your fills, to even play open-handed, and be able to do whatever you want to with either hand. We need to have solid coordination between our hands, and a lot of drummers are missing that because of that weak hand, and we kind of shove it aside and we just wish that it wouldn't be there, but we don't actually try to fix it. It's time. This is your call to action. Fix your weak hand. You don't have to put up with it. Go dive into the course, eliminate your weak hand in 3 steps.
All right, thanks so much for watching, and thanks so much for hanging out with me today. It's been a lot of fun. I love these simple, basic hand technique lessons because they're so transformative and you can gain so much value out of this kind of information. So I hope you have a great rest of your week. As always, you can do this. Stay non-glamorous. I'll see you on the next lesson.